Hello and welcome to Cannamantv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this episode of Real Cannabis Stories, I get the chance to talk with Lisa Quarrel. Lisa is the mother of Cole, who was diagnosed with epilepsy at a very young age. After going through a variety of treatments and numerous medications that provided a range of side effects, Lisa decided to inquire about alternative treatments that could potentially help Cole's condition. Since discovering cannabis to be a successful alternative for Cole, Lisa has campaigned, crowdfunded, and tirelessly pushed back at the authorities that continuously inhibit the ability for Cole's medicine to be funded through the NHS. So, make sure and like and subscribe, and stick around until the end, so you don't miss out on the end of episode cartoon. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Thanks for joining me, Lisa.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So we'll start at the beginning then. When did Cole have his first seizure, and how much longer after was he diagnosed?
Cole took his first seizure at 3 months old. He was diagnosed really quickly within, I think it was about the first month. They initially thought Cole had West syndrome. Right. So he went for a MRI scan within the first month of having these seizures, and then he was on a course of steroids, and once the steroids weaned off, he went from having infantile spasms to focal seizures. And it was at that point they knew that he had focal epilepsy, and because of the MRI scan, they knew the reason that he had it was because he has damaged tissue in the left temporal lobe of his brain, which is cortical dysplasia. So,
right. So for those that are unaware, what is a focal seizure in comparison to drop seizures and stuff like
that? Focal seizures, it's more in his kind of eyes, and it's in a one area of the brain. So. Right. With West syndrome, it would have affected all of both sides of his brain, right. And it would have caused a kind of big interference, if you like, and he wouldn't fully recover. From the focal seizures that Cole has, it's all down his right side and mainly in one area. So, yeah.
So I take it that they just immediately put him on medication?
Yeah, he was straight on initially steroids, and then when they took the steroids away, he started on, I think the first drug they put him on was Keppra, right. If I remember right. He's been on 20.
Jesus.
So it's I'm trying to remember. I can remember most of the ones he was on, yeah. And I remember the ones that caused him the most damage. Keppra being one of them. Yeah, so.
What was the worst side effects that Cole experienced with taking these?
He's had rashes, he's had temperatures, he's had kind of sickness. But I would say the worst was the moods that he got from Keppra. He's been on Keppra twice. He was on it first of all when he was about a baby, and then again when he was until he was about 2 or 3. And the moods got so bad that he used to smash up his room and be violent towards his brother. And right. Then again after he was in hospital, they put him back on Keppra again, and it didn't work. And he became, I described him as like an old person that had, what do you call it? Sorry, my brain's not kicked in this morning. He would just say things right. Without thinking. So he was...
Like Tourette's?
No, kind of more like somebody that's got... that's terrible. Yes.
Hey, how ironic. That's perfectly ironic to be a dementia.
Yeah, he would just, his dad's gran had dementia, and the wee soul, she used to say random things to people, and it would just be so embarrassing. And Cole was doing the same. You know, he would shout at people being ugly or being fat, and I would be mortified, and that's just not the wee boy that he is. So, it played a lot of kind of with his moods and stuff.
I take it, did that just lead up to him eventually getting, was it brain surgery when he was 2, is that right?
Yeah, he had brain surgery when he was 2.5, November 2014, and he had a lesionectomy on his left temporal lobe, which was just part of the area that where the seizures were coming from, removed. And but again, that didn't work either, because 6 months later the seizures came back, and even though he'd had brain surgery, he had to remain on the medication that he was on prior to surgery and after surgery for I think it was about a year after. He had to stay on the same medication.
6 months after he had brain surgery, the medication, he was still taking the same medication, it was having no effect?
No, none. He had 6 months seizure free, and then the seizures came back. And for that first kind of 6 months where he had seizures, they came back quite slowly. So he was only having, I think he had 3 that year, and then the following year they came back quite full on, and that was him having them every other day. We would try a new drug, and they would maybe go away for 2 weeks, and then they would start again. And as soon as the seizures start, the doctors would say, oh, we'll increase it slightly, we'll try this, we'll take this down, we'll put that up, and then, right. They would take that up, take that down, and then what would happen is as soon as the seizures came through the drug, though it didn't matter whether we tweaked it slightly or not, once the seizures were back, that was us, we knew that the medication had stopped working. And then we would just have to keep trying another combination. I think the most he was on at any one time was 4.
Jesus, 4, yeah. Is that just throughout like 2 times a day, 3 times a day, or?
Twice a day. Most of his medication was twice a day,
Yeah.
Because he was in nursery. I was always working part time, so he was always in nursery or school, and so the medication would be given before and then before bed.
That's a lot of pills to be given the wee guy. I mean, what is this, 2015, 2016?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, what happened then? I take it you just getting tired of the same cycle that you were in, and you just thought, I need to try something else?
We kind of plodded on in 2016 into 2017, and then they started kind of talking about a second brain surgery. But at the time of the first brain surgery, we were told, that there's absolutely no chance that there's no guarantees that this will take the seizures away, and there is a much higher risk the second time round. So we pretty much dismissed all surgery chat. And then in 2018, the beginning of 2018, his seizures got really bad, probably the worst they'd ever been. And then we started getting I kind of spoke to the consultant and David's dad. The 3 of us sat down and kind of said, look, what's our options, because we can't continue like this. It's seriously affecting his development. And then they said, well, we can either go over all the medicines that we've already tried, because he's post-surgery, and see if they work the second time round. If not, the only thing that we can offer is a second brain surgery. So we were kind of chatting about the risks and stuff, and then in June, I think it was May or June 2018, I put a post out on social media and just said, we've drawn a blank with Cole. Does anyone know of anything available in any other part of the world that I could take Cole to have another opinion? Some treatment that's maybe not available in the UK. Yeah. My background is, I was fundraising for 10 years before my youngest came along, and mainly the fundraising I did was for children who needed surgery or treatment that was available in a different country that wasn't available here, so they had to pay private.
Right.
One was my wee cousin's daughter who needed brain surgery on the nerve endings in her brain for her cerebral palsy, and then there was another wee boy who had epilepsy who needed some surgery in America. It was only available in Miami. So I knew that as much as we've got an amazing NHS, not all the answers for everybody is here. And there are specialist clinics all over the world. So I kind of took to social media and asked, and everybody commented was cannabis oil. And at that point, I was quite anti-cannabis oil, just because I was a police officer for 10 years. My only experience with cannabis was a very kind of blinkered view, which was it caused paranoia, it made people withdrawn, it gave them psychosis, all the stuff that is kind of well documented but not really backed up by any scientific evidence. So I kept dismissing it and saying, oh no, Cole's on clobazam, which was a drug at the time that he was on, so he can't take the cannabis oil, which at that time was Epidiolex, was the trial cannabis or medicine that was getting trialled. It's now licensed in the UK, but it was just being trialled at that time. And at that point, if you were on clobazam, you couldn't be on Epidiolex.
Right.
So I kind of started researching, and initially when I was researching, I'll be honest, I was researching looking for the bad bits to back up what I believed, and I couldn't find it. the only things I could find that were negative were written by a pharmaceutical company that set to gain from cannabis never being legalised. So I then started doing a bit of research into other families, other parents, you know, the kind of big stories that were out there. Alfie Dingley's mum, Hannah Deacon, Callie Blackwell was another massive one, even though it wasn't epilepsy, but with her son dead in cancer. It gave me chills when I read her story. And because she was very similar to me, she documented everything pretty much daily on Facebook. And I've done the same with Cole since he was months old. So you could see it real time. It wasn't, as the doctors kept telling me, propaganda that was just made up online. And then there was Sophia Gibson's parents, Danielle and Darren. There was just so many. And then I found myself in a world of Facebook community where there was so many parents all fighting for the same thing. And I was oblivious to this because it never affected me before. And then Vera Tooney, one of the other parents from Ireland, she had spoke about a clinic called the Clapa Clinic in Barcelona. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly. And I contacted the Clapa Clinic, sent them over Cole's medical records, and one of the doctors there contacted me. We had a video call, and I told him everything. He was quite shocked that Cole had never been offered any kind of alternative therapies, considering we had ticked all the boxes that the UK require. They said start on a CBD product that's legal but does have a tiny amount of THC in it. And so at first I was a bit kind of annoyed because I was thinking, well, this is not going to help. I was putting it along in the same box as the stuff you would buy at Holland & Barrett, you know. So I was thinking, no, it's not that I need. You know, I need the prescription stuff that all the parents are getting, this Bedrolite. That's all I could add in my brain. I was like, this is what I need. And he said, well, you can't start there. You need to start at the bottom and work your way up. That's how cannabis works. So they'd said to me to start on a product. They gave me 3 to choose from because the Clapa Clinic don't sell cannabis oil. You have to source it, but they can recommend ones that they think are quite good. So they gave me 3 to go and research, and the one that I picked was my CBD. I think it was 10% strain at the time, and it was full extract. So it was shipped to me and delivered to the house within about a week after that. By this point, we were down in, it was November. I'd went quite public with the campaign. I'd asked the doctors, they'd all said no, nobody was willing to help medically. They just kept saying Cole didn't fit into the criteria because he didn't have 2 of the rarest forms of epilepsy, which was Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and Dravet. You could only get access to Epidiolex at that time if you had diagnosed those 2 conditions, and also, believe it or not, if you weren't a candidate for brain surgery. So they would rather the child went for brain surgery than was allowed to try a cannabis-based medicine.
That's ridiculous.
So Cole didn't he didn't have any of those conditions, and he was a candidate for brain surgery. So I thought, right, okay, I'll try it. At that time, Cole was taking a thing called toy paralysis after every seizure, which is almost like a stroke. Right. So he would take a seizure, and then after the seizure, he wouldn't recover for, initially it was 10 minutes, and then it was lasting hours, and he couldn't talk properly. His body would go numb. And as you can imagine, his brain's fully working, so he's completely confused. A 6-year-old boy who doesn't even know he's had a seizure because he doesn't know. And then he wakes up and he can't speak and he can't move and he's wet himself. So it became quite upsetting and distressing for him. So we got the cannabis oil, and within 3 or 4 days, his walking got better. He stopped having accidents through the night, and his speech came back, and the toy paralysis disappeared. His seizures only slightly lessened, but you know, the fact that he could then go to school, I could go back to work, and he could function, and his anxiety was less, was just amazing. So I kind of knew that I was on the right track, and this was what Cole needed. And I had an idea that the problem was that it was the THC needed to be slightly increased to get him to his seizures coming back down again. So I pushed and pushed, and I got a phone call from his doctor, or his consultant, not long after that, and they said to me, this was December, Cole had been one of the 5 children in Scotland whose name had been picked out of a hat to be selected to try Epidiolex, even though he didn't fit any of the criteria. And at that time, I said to him, there's probably more chance of me winning the lottery. I think that was my exact words to him. You know, it was nothing to do with the fact that I'd went public, I'd went to papers, and I had even went to the First Minister that Cole's name happened to get picked out this hat. It was purely luck. So at that time I said to him, I'm going to be honest, I'm not really sure I want to try it now. And he said, what? You've been fighting like this for months. And I said, yeah, I know, but I now know more about cannabis, and Epidiolex is a CBD isolate, and Cole is on a whole plant, and it's working, but it's not working enough. So I think that's the route that I need to continue. I spoke to family, I spoke to Cole's dad, and we decided, you know, we'll give it a go, because we can't really fight for the next day up if we've not tried it, because that will always be pulled up that we've not tried it. So we said, right, okay, we'll try it. The prescription was supposed to come in January, and I started taking him off his My CBD in preparation for him starting Epidiolex, because he couldn't be on 2 CBD products. And the prescription unfortunately was delayed, and so he had been off it for 3 weeks, and then it was delayed for another week. And within about the last week, we noticed his toy paralysis came back. And then the day we went to collect his Epidiolex from the hospital was, I think it was about the 10th of February, or the 12th of February, something like that. He collapsed at the lifts and took one of the biggest seizures he's ever taken, and Cole's seizures are mainly through the night, so this was a big thing. And it took him a long time to recover. We had to stay in the hospital for an hour for him to come out of seizure, and after it I had to wheelchair him to the car, because he was his toy paralysis had come back. But we were told, persevere, you know, start low, build your way up. So we did. Cole's dad works offshore, and he had taken him away for the weekend just before he started in Epidiolex and before the My CBD had fully come out of his system. And he was riding a 2-wheeler bike. He was climbing frames and, you know, doing all adventure stuff. And then Cole's dad went offshore for 3 weeks, and when he came back, Cole was in a wheelchair, unable to move his own head, couldn't speak, was drooling. We were at the stage where he'd stopped being able to eat properly, he was choking. And then within about 2 weeks, he was rushed into hospital and unresponsive. And we were still giving him this Epidiolex, and I was saying, you know, enough's enough. Unknown to everybody else, I had flown to Holland and taken his medical records to speak to a consultant over there about Bedrolite, and they had given me a prescription. But obviously, with him still being on Epidiolex and under the hospital care, I couldn't give him it until I'd got him home. And then while he was in hospital, they said to me, we don't know. We've never seen anything like it. We've never seen a child deteriorate so quickly, so badly. We had, at that point, they'd done an MRI, they'd done an EEG, they'd done a lumbar puncture, extensive urines, extensive bloods. I think, to be fair, they were checking with the bloods and the urines. I wasn't giving them something that I shouldn't, because my campaign was so public. I think they assumed that I must have been giving them something that they didn't know about. Nothing showed up, everything was clear, and they kept saying, we just don't know, we've never seen anything like it, which is terrifying as a parent to hear the people who have been involved in your son's care since he was 3 months old. So I said to them, they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want him off Epidiolex and I want him back on whole plant. And they said, well, we can't support that decision. You're his parent. We're taking nothing to do with it. And I said, well, as long as you understand that that's what I'm going to do, because I don't want anything to interfere with his care. And he's obviously now in hospital. And they basically took nothing to do with it. Maybe turned a blind eye, I don't know. But I went home, got his Bedrolite, brought it into the hospital and started administering it. And within the first day, his seizures halved. And then the second day, they halved again. And then by the third day, the hospital decided that they wanted to try him on this new drug. Not a new drug as in it was new, it was just new to Cole. He'd never had it before. It's one of the oldest drugs actually, called phenytoin. And it was one of the drugs that we've been kind of saying no to from day one, because it's quite a toxic drug.
Right.
And while you're on it, your liver function levels and everything have to be monitored very closely because it can go toxic really quickly. So they decided that they were going to try and get him out of what they thought at the time was status. And the best way to do that was give him a loading dose of phenytoin. So I had to stop his Bedrolite at that point because he was getting 6 times the amount that he would in a day of phenytoin loaded into his body, to almost kind of shock the brain into rebooting itself. And he got that, and then a couple of days later he got it again. So then the phenytoin kind of took a sideline, the Bedrolite took a sideline, and then we started it again when we got back out of hospital. And the 1st of April was the first night he had no seizures, and he went from having 20 at the very most to none on the 1st of April, and he'd been rushed into hospital on the 22nd of March. So it was a really short space of time. By the 11th of April, he was back out walking, starting to try and run again. His talking had almost came back. And by the end of April, we had Cole back to the way he was in February before he'd started on the Epidiolex.
So I mean, is that April 2019 that he became fully himself again, yeah?
Yeah, April 2019, and I've got video evidence of Cole from him getting really sick to him getting better. Daily, I was taking videos in the hospital of Cole trying to say "I love you, Mum," and he couldn't say the words.
Let's say I love you. I love you, Mummy. Mummy. Yay! Yes, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
To fast forward 2 weeks, and he was shouting, singing The Lion King, and jumping off rocks. So I mean, it was huge. Obviously, at that time as well, they didn't know that I was doing an undercover documentary with the disclosure team for BBC, who had spoke to me about it in January, and I'd agreed to do it. And at that point, I didn't know what drug Cole needed, what cannabis option we were going through, whether it was ever going to happen. I didn't know Cole was going to get as sick as he did in March or beginning of February, end of February, March.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. So again, the documentary was done not as a one-sided. It took in everybody's opinions, including Professor Helen Cross, who works for Great Ormond Street, and she's now leading a clinical trial for children who have got epilepsy and for children who are looking at getting cannabinoid medicines, which I find completely bizarre, considering she said on my documentary that she believed that some of the children were suffering from placebo. Sorry.
Right.
She said in my documentary that she believed that some of the children were having a placebo effect, and that some of them weren't actually getting better. It was just they thought they were getting better because they were on this cannabis, which to me is just absolutely crazy, because I can get the placebo effect for a parent. I could get 5 times in Cole's life where he's been put on a new medication, and as his parent, I've so desperately wanted him to get better that, I've said to his dad, I feel like he's a wee bit brighter today on that, or I feel like he's eating more. And it's because you just desperately want your child to get better. You want this next medication to be the one that works.
Yeah.
So I get that as an adult, that you could suffer placebo. Children don't understand.
Yeah.
Cole doesn't even know he's having seizures. So for him to be having a placebo when he has no idea the kind of rules and situations around what he's going through is just nonsense. And also the fact that physically Cole was in a wheelchair. He couldn't stand up on his own unaided. He was incontinent. He was unable to eat and unable to speak, back to being a wee boy that's sitting upstairs just now on the Xbox and chatting away to his friends, and just being a typical almost 8-year-old boy is nuts for somebody that for somebody who thinks that is possible, that there can be a placebo to lead a clinical trial for this, is just bizarre to me, because I feel as if you've got that kind of feelings already and you're a professor, then you're probably not the best place to be doing trials into that, because I don't think you've got the right attitude towards cannabis.
In 2019, did you continue, was it private funding? Were you crowdfunding to get Cole's medicine?
Yeah, I had to do a lot of fundraisers and stuff, because initially we couldn't do crowdfunding or GoFundMe because I was technically doing something that was illegal at that time. So from the beginning of the year till May, it was all done through pretty much fundraising events, local events, families helping. We did a lot of kind of sport activities and head shaves and that kind of thing. And then in May 2019, I went down to London and met with a private consultant who agreed that I'd done the right decision for Cole, which was such a good day, because finally somebody in the medical profession who is a paediatric neurologist agreed that I did the right thing for Cole. And she kept saying, you know, I just can't believe the difference, and she was quite emotional about it. So yeah, that was good, and it meant then that I had a private prescription, so legally I was in the right. Just before my documentary went aired, and then even though I had admitted to smuggling drugs into the country and you know, giving them to my son, I thought, well, now it's legal, hopefully they'll see that, and the Cole seizure free, that they'll understand that I did the right thing. But obviously that wasn't exactly the case. I had 2 detective sergeants turned up at my door a couple of days after the documentary had went live. They'd said that they weren't sure if anything I did was criminal, but they would be investigating into that, and also to check for child protection issues, to see if the decisions I'd made were in the rights of my child. So I was under investigation from May until beginning of June, until Cole's birthday in July was when I got the call to tell me that there was no further investigations taking place and there'd been no charges brought.
That would have brought in an enormous amount of stress, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I had the documentaries went out on a Wednesday night, and on the Thursday morning I was front page news in just every paper. Ex-cop smuggles drugs for sick son, you know, and that headline's never really left me. But for me, and there was quite a lot of people that sent me messages or commented and said, you know, you're an idiot. Why did you do this? Why go public? Why not just keep it a secret? Like, why did you tell people if you knew that this was, the police have got to do their job, kind of thing? And I'd said, well, I thought for me, it was quite a unique case that I was a police officer for 10 years. So somebody that had my background, that never committed a crime in her life, who had a really negative outlook to cannabis, and only knew what I was taught and what I was told. I wanted to show that the systems that are in place right now for parents such as me, that are fighting to access this for their children, at the end of the day, it's a plant. It's given to us by Mother Nature. It's not a man-made drug. I wanted to show that this is the lengths that people are going to save their children, because we rely heavily on the NHS, and the NHS told me there was nothing else they could do for my son, and that if I continued on this route, he would deteriorate and die. And when I went to meet for the brain surgery to discuss the second brain surgery, they told me that there was a good chance Cole could die on the table, as there is with any surgery. But there was a really high chance that Cole would be paralysed down one side and partially sighted for the rest of his life. You know, there was no good outcome. There wasn't. They never said to me, "Oh, he's going to go in for this surgery, he's going to come out and he'll be seizure free for the rest of his life and everything will be great." You know, the only outcomes were negative. They were better than him dying, and they were better than him struggling with seizures for the rest of his life. But it would mean that as a parent, I was looking at my child, who at that point was running about and riding a bike, and I was making a decision to take him in for surgery to leave him paralysed down one side and partially sighted for the rest of his life. That I would have to sign that form. I don't know any parent that would take that decision lightly. And what terrifies me is, you know, I'm quite sure there have been parents that have sat in that chair and thought, well, this is the best option, because they don't know about the world of cannabis. And that's what's really upsetting, is that the NHS are amazing. but they can only tell you about the information that they know or they're allowed to know, and that there's so many alternative therapies out there that can have other effects on our kids that are not the terrible drugs that we get from the pharmaceutical companies. Because with cannabis, there isn't a side effect. Cole's never had any side effects from cannabis, none. Folks say, does he eat loads? Does he get the munchies? No, Cole's a skinny wee mini that I'm desperately trying to feed up because he's so tiny and he's really funny with foods. He's funny with textures and stuff. He always has been. Does he get stoned? No. If Cole ever needs Calpol, then he gets more drowsy from Calpol than he does ever from his cannabis. It has absolutely no effect on him other than his seizures have gone. Where the other drug that he's on at the moment, phenytoin, is causing him severe side effects just now. He's getting dizziness, he's getting headaches, he's getting over emotional, hypersensitive to noise, terrified of things like he's developed a new fear of flies. Where it being summer and the grass not being cut for a few months is quite difficult. And these are all side effects from the phenytoin that he's on. And that was because the NHS had to change the brand of his phenytoin because the initial prescription was for an Epineutin brand and it went out of stock. So they then gave him Dilantin very quickly when he went on it. And he was on that for 10 months and everything was fine. We've been doing great. And then 4 weeks ago, they decided that they couldn't use Dilantin anymore. They had to go back to Epineutin because Dilantin is actually unlicensed and they can only use that when Epineutin is out of stock. So they put him back on Epineutin, and again, we're struggling with side effects. And I've been fighting with them for the last 4 weeks to say, well, he was fine on Dilantin, so can we just get that back, please? And they're saying, well, no, because it's unlicensed. So we're not allowed to give you that if Epineutin's in stock. And I'm saying, but surely the health of my son is more important than what's in stock and what's not. But you know, that's just the situation with the NHS, and that's what infuriates me. It's they're looking at boxes and ticking boxes, and instead of well, what's best for Cole. For 10 months he was fine and he never had headaches and he wasn't dizzy, and he wasn't over emotional, and yet here we are, because now one drug doesn't sit well with a license, we're back again fighting the same thing. And it's, you know, so it just seems to be a constant battle, and nobody seems to be looking at Cole as a child or using any kind of common sense. All they seem to be doing is, well, they say no, computer says no. So even though Cole's been the best he's ever been in his whole life, and he had one seizure on the 11th of August last year. He'd been on holiday with his dad. While he was on holiday, Cole's breathing went a wee bit heavy. Now that's usually the first sign of Cole's seizures coming back. So David had phoned and said, Lisa, I think his breathing went a wee bit heavy last night. I'm going to stick his cannabis oil up and we'll take it for there. And I said, okay. But anybody that knows me knows I'm a bit of a control freak, especially when it comes to Cole and his medication. So when he came back, I'd said, was there anything else while he was away? He said, no, just that first night. And I thought, it's maybe been the travel, time difference, the difference in temperature. I think maybe you put his cannabis oil up a wee bit too prematurely. We'll take it back down. So it was only 0.1 of a mil. So I took it back down, but again, within about 4 days, the seizure came. 30-second seizure, didn't go into a full seizure. For Cole, it was really mild. And I was so upset the next day with myself. And I texted his dad saying, excuse my language, I've made an arse it. I've literally, I should have listened and I didn't. And I'm going to put it back up. And I've put it back up on the 11th of August that night. And since then, he's not had any other seizures, touch wood. We are now almost a year seizure free. And even in that year, he's only had one, which was the 11th of August. And before that was the 1st of April, 2019. So considering we had a wee boy that was not only having up to 20 a day, but it was affecting me not being able to go to work, Cole not being able to go to school, his brother not really getting much sleep because we would be up and down through the night. Family members, they couldn't stay overnight with anyone, everybody was terrified. Then obviously we had to get in a wheelchair, we had to have intense physiotherapy, OT, speech and language, then we had a fortnight in hospital stay, plus all the tests and things we did. I don't really know what their argument is,
Yeah.
because I'm kind of saying, well, look how much money I've saved you guys, because he's not been in hospital other than to have tests to make sure everything's okay. And every time he's been in, it's been me that's asked, can you check him to make sure everything's okay? And everything's been fine. And we're still seizure free, and the hospital can get on with other kids that need their help, and I get to look after Cole and have my wee boy back, that I thought I was going to lose in March.
Yeah.
So it just the common sense side of thing is just not there, and that's what I think is the most infuriating for me, is that the people that have been around Cole since he was 3 months old have been with us on this whole journey. It's the same medical team that's been with him, and I've got so much respect for them. They've been so good to me and Cole, but for them now to disregard me as a parent, when they know me and they know what I'm like, and how particular I am, it just upsets me that they won't take this serious and fight with me.
Yeah. I mean, that's been, obviously, like you said, that's been essentially a full year almost, give or take 2 or 3 weeks. But that's tremendous that you guys at that stage. Annoying, it obviously has been completely ignored by the people that are in control. So, what specific medicine is it Cole's taken? And you said that which was the other, was it phenatone or something like that that was causing his side effects? I mean, is this something that you're trying to resolve with a higher THC product, or are you just content essentially where he's at now?
Well, so what was happening was his breathing was going to be a bit funny, so I thought his seizures were on his way back. We put his Bedrolite up, and that's completely fine. It's settled, everything's fine. I have requested Bedica to be added because Cole's on Bedrolite, which is 9% to 1%, so 9% CBD to 1% THC ratio. That's what he's been on since March, since coming out of the hospital. And he's just doing amazing. Initially, I was scared that with the breathing coming back and I'm struggling with these side effects that we might have needed a strain swap. And I'd requested Bedica, which is the THC only product, and you just add in what you need, a tiny drop, as and when required. But we haven't needed that, thank goodness. He's completely settled. He had put weight on and he has grown, so that would make sense. The side effects, unfortunately, are with the phenatone, and with the phenatone, his liver function levels sit between usually 8 and 9. Between 8 and 12 is his safe zone, and we took him in, and his liver function levels were sitting at 15.
Zero.
And it gave me a bit of a fright. But the hospital were kind of saying, well, it's not dangerous until he hits 20.
Oh, that's
and I
good.
was like, yeah, but they've nearly doubled. They've nearly doubled in a couple of weeks, and the only thing that's changed is the fact that he's changed brands of the phenatone. So they said take his phenatone down, which we have. So we've taken it down to, I think we're 9.5. No, 9. We were up at 11, so we've taken it down to 9. And so far, so good. His side effects seem to be lessening. The fact that there's still no seizures. And then next week we'll request for him to have his liver function checked again, just to make sure they are coming down and that they're not staying where they are. And for me, it's more a case of trying to balance. I've got to do it myself because the NHS won't take anything to do with Cole's Bedrolite. And obviously, any cannabis-based medicine kind of purifies your liver. So if he's running on a medicine that affects his liver, if I'm increasing one, I've got to make sure the other's coming down slightly. And it's quite a lot of pressure for a parent, because I don't get the big salaries to make these decisions. And I'm not. I don't have letters after my name. But if I'm an expert in anything, it's Cole, and I just trust my gut. That's what I always say to any parent: trust your gut, because the only time I've not trusted it is when it's failed me and Cole's ended up not well. So yeah, we just need to play it by ear with the phenatone just now. They're saying that if it doesn't stop and his side effects continue, believe it or not, they won't put him back onto the Dilantin, which he was coping with. They would rather they take him off phenatone completely and then start a whole new drug.
What was why?
Rather than just put him back on, because they won't give me Dilantin because it's unlicensed. Even though they were happy to give him it for 10 months when it suited them because Epinephrine was out of stock, now they won't give me it back because they're saying, well, it's unlicensed, so it had to be imported from Canada. Cole's dad's kind of like, well, can we just buy it? Can we go private and get that as well? Which is frustrating to me because I'm like, well, we're already £1,400 a month getting his cannabis oil. So now we're expected to pay for another drug privately because Epinewton's back in stock.
Yeah.
It's just so unfair.
And that thing you mentioned before about you trust your gut, the parental intuition is key. What I've noticed about one of these
Yeah.
stories, it's like you're dealing with a parent who's getting told through the authorities, this is what the direction, and they're looking at their child and they have the relationship of their child and they know what's best for them. And that's what ends up leading you to the right direction. And that's what's frustrating because, like you just mentioned earlier, that there will be parents out there that will just ignore their gut and then go with the doctors, and then they'll be like,
Yeah.
perhaps watching this video and sitting in the company of their loved one who they feel they've made the wrong decision and now are trying to recuperate that damage.
Yeah.
So it's a really painful situation for everybody involved. So this year, essentially, I mean, I think you were, was it this week that you were in the Daily Record for the same
Yeah.
thing, just trying to, what was the reason for that, the same thing?
Christine Jardine, one of the MPs, had wrote to Matt Hancock saying, you know, you promised these parents. We'd met with Matt Hancock March 2019, just before Cole got burst into hospital. Actually, I was down in Westminster along with another group of parents. But I'm not part of any campaign group. I just work myself and try and fight for Cole. And I just found it was just too messy because most of the campaign group NDRP are run from England, and most of the parents are English, and they were fighting for NHS England. Right. And I went down there, spent hundreds of pounds of my own money, went down to Westminster, spent a whole day away from Cole, walking the streets from Westminster to Downing Street, got a lot of news, and spoke to a lot of people to come home and be told, actually, you can't be part of this review that Matt Hancock's promised because you're under NHS Scotland, and it's only going to be patients that are under NHS England. Right. And I was like, all right, how does that work? Because I thought, you know, this health was UK government. And he was like, no, you need to go to NHS Scotland. So I was fuming because I'd wasted all this money and all this time down there fighting, and I was dismissed because I was under NHS Scotland.
That's ridiculous.
So I then came home. Yeah.
That's in particular because of the fact that the NHS, the England control, Westminster control Scottish distribution of these products. So where have you to march then? Yeah.
So I met with the health minister here, Jane Freeman. She was less than helpful. I even took Cole along to meet her to say, you know, look at him. Here's a video of Cole in the hospital. I even asked her to look at a video of Cole taking a seizure to see what I had to look at for 20 times every night through the night, because I didn't sleep. He started seizing from sometimes 10 o'clock at night right through till 8 o'clock in the morning. So he's still to this day, Cole sleeps in my bed with me every night, and he's going to be 8 on the 26th of July. In fact, that's what I've been doing the last couple of days, is painting, because he's asked for his birthday if he can have his own bed in a room with his brother. So we've had to get an alarm system and a bed in his room, and it's probably more of a big deal for me than it is for him, because he's completely oblivious. He just thinks that that's his epilepsy gone. That he's fine now. It's me that's thinking, what if it comes back, you know? So so you know, I took him along to meet Jane Freeman. She never even acknowledged him. They sat in the same room together. She didn't have a conversation with him. She didn't even say hello. And she said that basically there was nothing she was willing to do. It wasn't there was anything that she could do. It was that there was nothing she was willing to do, and that she tried writing to me, because I said, what was the point of having this meeting face to face today then? Because, you know, I was supposed to be in Portpatrick with family friends. They were taking us down to their house for a couple of days, and after everything that we've been through as a family, this was the July after COVID got better. Why have you asked me here today if you've already told me this by letter? And she said, because I've tried telling you by letter and you won't listen. So I thought if I'd told you to your face, you would understand.
That was a pretty
and
cool
I was like, wow. Yeah, wow. So I said, right, okay. And I said to her, you know, I'm not asking you to force a clinician to write a prescription for me. What I'm asking for you to do is put things in place to allow that clinician to prescribe for me, because Cole's clinician already asked to prescribe Bedrolite and was told no by the BPNA. Because of the BPNA guidelines are so restrictive, he will not go against those guidelines. He even spoke to his other colleagues there's 14 who are on the specialist register in Scotland that can prescribe cannabis-based medicines, who could if they wanted to, but none of them will because of the BPNA guidelines. they just will not go against the BPNA guidelines.
That's the thing.
And the BPNA guidelines, which really upsets me, is the two of the leads for BPNA that write the guidelines they work with GW Pharmaceuticals as expert witnesses, and they give their expert opinions on what they think should and shouldn't be allowed in the UK and what should and should be licensed. And I don't believe then that it's a coincidence that the only drugs that are licensed in the UK for cannabis-based medicines happen to be GW pharmaceutical products, and the rest of them can't get in. And I just think that's a conflict of interest. And when I challenged it, it was also challenged on my BBC documentary. It was just brushed aside. That's just how the UK work. That's just what happens. That's it. Deal with it. Yeah, kind of same as pharmaceutical reps run into your hospitals and say use your brand of drug, and they take the doctors out for lunches and dinners and drinks. Because I've been there. I was a medical receptionist for 5 years before I joined the police, and we used to get wined and dined by pharmaceutical reps to help us invest in their products. It's just a real bad conflict of interest, and it's not a good way that the UK government and the NHS work. It's greed, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah.
No, I doubt it's actually corruption. I mean, it's conflict of interest is a good way of putting it. And the fact is, you say it's just disregarded and brushed aside. It's corruption. That's what this is. And if the system isn't designed in that situation, it's like, it's corruption. That's the best way to describe it, without a doubt. So that's what the reason why you're in the paper this week was because, I mean, was that from that interaction and then she criticising Matt Hancock, or?
No, the reason I was in the paper this week was because Christine Jardine had basically wrote a letter saying, enough's enough, we've waited 2 years, you promised us 2 years ago that you were going to do something about this, you were going to lift the red tape. The whole point of the law being changed in November 2018 was to make it an easier route for children to access cannabis-based medicines, and all that it's actually done is made it harder, because they took away the panel where it was an individual case basis and you could go and fight your children's case to a panel, and that's how Hannah and Danielle and Darren got the prescription on the NHS for their children. They had to go through a panel system, and they got it prior to the law being changed. So now the law's been changed. People think, oh yeah, but there's so many prescriptions have been written for Epidiolex, and that's because of the law change. The law didn't affect Epidiolex because the law was changed to allow a THC product to be prescribed. Epidiolex has absolutely no THC in it. It's a CBD isolate, so it was always allowed to be prescribed. Sativex was prescribed prior to November 2018, and it's got THC and CBD in it. So the law change had nothing to do with that. So it hasn't actually helped anyone. In fact, it's hindered hundreds of families getting access to medicine like myself, because if Epidiolex doesn't work for you, there is no alternative. You get one chance of a CBD medicine, and that's Epidiolex. If it doesn't work, they tell you, oh well, it won't work for you, which is nonsense, because Cole's living proof that, and that's the thing, what I think is the scariest for parents. There's so many people say, oh, I tried Epidiolex, so cannabis medicine doesn't work for my child. And I'll say, well, cannabis medicine isn't just Epidiolex. That's a CBD isolate. The way I look at it is, cannabis is an amazing multivitamin, and giving somebody a CBD isolate is like just giving them a vitamin C. They're not going to get the goodness out of everything, because they're just taking one tiny part of it and giving them that, and that it's all about ratios and bodies, and what works for one won't work for another. And that's why the clinical trials that they're trying to push won't ever work for cannabis, because what would work for you wouldn't work for me, what wouldn't work for Cole. Every child and every person's different. It has to go with an individual basis.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Lisa, and that's the irritating thing as well, is the subjectivity between each person, and the variability of the medicine. These are two things that I think most of the people running these so-called clinical trials or whatever, and the politicians, they have no idea of that. This is the starting point, really, the variability of the medicine and the subjectivity of the person's endocannabinoid system. So yeah, so where are you sitting right at this moment? Is it just all essentially still crowdfunding to maintain Cole's medicine and raise awareness of these situations?
Yeah, I'm still using GoFundMe. I had to open a separate bank account for Cole, so that there's a couple of people who are wanting to pay direct debits for Cole's medicine every month. I'm just shouting from the rooftops to everybody that will listen. I keep a diary of Cole on my Facebook page, and I've got a separate page for Cole called Cole's Fund for Sick Kids that, you know, I document big change of events and stuff. Right now, nothing's really changed for the last few months since before lockdown. I met in, trying to remember what month it was now because everything seems to be merging. It was just, I think maybe February, January, February, I met with Catherine Calderwood, Chief Medical Officer at that time, and Rosemary Parr, who's the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer, and 30 MSPs in Holyrood, and I stood up and spoke in front of them, and I played a video of Cole before, during and after, and you know, one of the very few times I've allowed anyone to see Cole taking a seizure, because I don't put it online.
Yeah.
And the room were in tears, and every one of them said they wanted to help me. Catherine Calderwood said, I want to make Cole a priority, you know, I want to find a way through the NHS to help you. And all the MSPs formed a support, they were a multi agency group, and said, you know, there was Tories, SNP, Labour, Greens, everybody in the room, you know, and they all said, Libs, we're behind you, and they all signed a letter to say, help this wee boy get his medicine through the NHS. Still, we're no further forward. The promises that Catherine Calderwood made disappeared prior to her stepping down. She set up a meeting in the hospital with Cole's consultant, and when I went along, I expected him to fully be briefed in what I was going for. He had no idea why I was there. Nobody had told him anything, so when I told him what the meeting had said, he was like, don't know anything about this. They then mentioned a second opinion and said, you know, I could get a second opinion in Cole, which I thought seemed quite positive at the time. And I said, well, if that's what it's going to take. And then I was told by Cole's consultant, actually, there's not really any point in you getting a second opinion, because there's 14 of us that can write the prescription, and I've spoke to them all, and every one of them have agreed that they won't prescribe for Cole. So it was kind of like, well, I'm not doing it and none of them are doing it, so what's the point of having a second opinion? Because it doesn't matter who I go and see, the 14 people that could prescribe have all said they won't prescribe because of the BPNE guidelines. So just now it's more of a case of I'm continually writing to the government and the NHS and saying, you know, the guidelines have to be renewed. As far as I'm concerned, the guidelines are written in nothing pure other than greed and corruption. Those guidelines do not tick any boxes for my son. They don't help any children that I've came in contact with, and you know, I keep in close contact with a lot of families that are doing the same fight as me, and they are all finding the same problems, the same brick walls, the same guidelines, you know. But I've yet to find anybody that's tried Vegelite or similar products with a THC element in it who have had any bad effects. Every single child has improved, some better than others. You know, Cole, I've just been so lucky that Cole has just, it's completely transformed his life. Cole's now dreaming for the first time in his life, months after he had it. Yeah, I didn't even know he could dream, because most of his seizures were through the night, so he didn't go into a deep enough sleep to have a dream. And now he can dream. He's wanting to get into his own bedroom. He's getting a wee bit of kind of freedom from being his mummy's apron strings, because I just don't let him out my sight. You know, he's back in mainstream school. There's just so much that, you know, we nearly lost. And in March they told me, you know, that was it. I thought I was losing him, and I sat in a hospital chair bawling my eyes out, thinking if I could get one thing back for Cole, would it be his voice, so I could talk to him, because I couldn't even talk to my own son, couldn't understand him. He could understand me because his brain was still working, it was just his speech had gone, and it was so frustrating because he was trying to ask me stuff and I couldn't help him. I didn't know what he was saying. I had got people out to look at my house to have my downstairs living room converted into a bedroom and a shower room so that I could wheel him in with his wheelchair. You know, so much had to be changed in our life, and within a couple of weeks we had him back, and it was just like a miracle. And folks say to me, don't use the word miracle when you're talking about cannabis. And I'm like, well, it's been our miracle. So it might not be a miracle for everybody. And yeah, and I know that it's not a drug that fixes everything and takes everything away. But for us, cannabis has been an absolute miracle. It's changed our life completely.
I don't think it's really anybody's position to say to somebody, you can't call this a miracle, because you're the one that's experiencing this every single day. And to go from, like you've mentioned, from like a couple of dozen fits a day to almost none, the none essentially with him, and he's back active. I mean, I've seen that video you mentioned about him when he's trying to talk and then try to say I love you, and then he goes on his bike, and it's brilliant that he's
Yeah.
going on his bike after it, because you're on your celly, man. This is the way it should be.
Uh-huh.
And yet you're
Yeah.
going to these people, these establishments with suits on and try to pretend like they know best. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it's a situation that's going to be looked on in the near future as a dark time. You know, it shouldn't be the
Yeah.
case.
I met with Coles Consultants boss after on the Catherine Calderwood promises. I met somebody quite high up in NHS Glasgow, and he was nothing short of patronising. I don't know what he expected to walk through the door, but he even said to me, "Oh, I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable. I didn't expect you to know this." And he kept, first of all, he tried to tell me that cannabis oil was in fact a medical device and wasn't actually a medicine. And you know, thankfully I had a good friend of mine with me who is very clued up on that subject, and he was like, "No, I think you'll find that cannabis oil is actually a medicine." And he gave him all this documented evidence, and he's like, you know, a medical device is if you were putting a pacemaker in someone, and you had to insert any kind of medicine into that, that's, you know, could be classed as that. Cannabis oil doesn't work like that. So he was kind of like, "Oh, right, okay." And he was just very patronising, and just, you know, he made all sorts of promises in that room. And at the end of it, he shook my hand and said, "You know, if ever my wife doesn't like her Christmas present and I need somebody to convince her, you'd be the one, because you've really changed my opinion today." And you know, I felt like I'd went in there when having already made his mind up with the type of person I was. I don't know if he thought I was somebody that was, you know, going to be stoned when I walked in there and not have a clue what I was talking about, and then to leave where I'm kind of feeling like I'd won him over. And then within about 3 weeks, I got a letter basically telling me nothing that he'd agreed. He said to me, "If you give me questions, write your questions down and send me them, I will have them answered honestly." And I said to him, "All I want from you is I want you to cut the crap. I want you to just tell me in plain English why it's okay for you to prescribe Epidiolex, but why, and it was okay for you to prescribe Epidiolex when it was unlicensed and code didn't fit the criteria, but why is it not okay for you to prescribe Edrolite, which is unlicensed and doesn't fit the criteria, when it's both the same thing at the end of the day, they're both approved drugs." And I've yet to have an answer to any of the questions that I asked him. You know, I just got this carte blanche referral to guidelines, terrible email that was so infuriating, because the last thing I said to him was, "Don't send me an email referring to guidelines, because I know them inside out. I could read them in my sleep. They're my life for my son." So when I meet people face to face and they don't have any answers, so all they do is refer, "Can I refer you back to the guidelines?" It's like, yeah, I'm here to speak to you why these guidelines are wrong. It's just infuriating.
It's good that you have that strength, though, in particular with the guy saying that it's a medical device, because on the bare bones of it, really, I mean, it's the Coles medicine, just like everyone, it's like Phil Monk described it as concentrated food for your endocannabinoid system, and that's the way it's seen. And I really hope that that's the way it's going to be embraced more in the future. So essentially, is that what you're dealing with now? Just this constant struggle trying to maintain Coles health and try to look forward to getting. I mean, are you pushing for funding? I'm assuming, yeah.
Yeah, well, I tried funding and I was not back. When lockdown happened, I wrote to the Health Minister and said to her, "I appreciate that you're not in a position to start any trials now, and I appreciate that you cannot force clinicians to write a prescription for Cole. However, you are in a position to fund Cole's medicine until such times as you guys catch up with what I already know, because I've been telling you this for the last 2 years and you won't listen, and you've been telling me you're going to look into it and you're not. So in the meantime, can you fund Cole's medicine?" And she said no. She couldn't be seen to fund a private prescription because it would be misuse of NHS money. So she refused point blank. And then another MSP wrote to me by email and said, "Why don't you try the NHS Trust? There's like a charity through the NHS. So if I had a parent that died and they were looked after in Ward 28, if I wanted to leave money to Ward 28 unless I don't ring fence it. It goes into the pot for the NHS charity, and it buys things that you can't get on the NHS. That's what it's for.
Right.
So I applied to them for funding for Cole's medicine, and they asked Cole's consultant his opinion, and he said no, he didn't believe that I should be funded for it because it was a private prescription that I chose to go private for, and that there was other options available to Cole within the NHS that I was choosing not to take.
That's yeah. I don't really know what to say to that kind of thing, if I'm being honest. I mean, what do you say to that? Because this wee guy, you know, it's like he should know Cole. He should know his response.
Yeah.
He should know, you know, through the chronology of difficulty that he's went through, all the documentation you have. I don't how you could put yourself in a position to then say no, there are other options available unless they're so blinded by what their position. I mean, what do you think's going on?
I have no idea. A lot of people say to me, is it money? And I'm like, well, I don't believe it can be money unless it's the money they're taking away from the pharmaceutical companies, if that's more important to them, because I don't believe it would cost the NHS any more to have cannabis medicine in the NHS. I believe it would save them an absolute fortune. I know I was a talk that Professor Mike Barnes done, and he was talking about the money that Alfie Dingley had saved the NHS in just 1 year, and it was over 100,000. Yeah. Now we're on year 3, I think, for those guys. And I know that with Sophia Gibson, she's not had any emergency hospital admissions in over a year. So the money that they're actually saving the NHS, and if that's 2 cases that have an NHS prescription, the only 2 cases that have an NHS prescription, both are saving the NHS money, then can you imagine if that was rolled out? It just doesn't make sense financially. I thought initially it was maybe ego. It was like, you know, you are a single parent that I think I've maybe got one higher to my name. You don't get to come in here and tell me as a consultant for neurology what's best for your son, because that's my job. So at first I thought it was that. But, you know, I sat in that hospital room, and so did Cole's consultant, with his head in his hands. And he was going on holiday. He was leaving to go on holiday for 3 weeks to Florida with his family, and he has young kids. And I could tell the pain in his face. He didn't think Cole was going to be here when he came back. He was like, I just don't know. And he looked genuinely devastated. And then, you know, he left, and that's when all the great changes came. And when he came back, I practically skipped into his office with Cole to say, ta-da, you know, and he didn't even lift his head up. He was so uninterested. He just went, you gave me a real fright, to Cole. You gave us a real fright. And I was a bit kind of like, do you think this is phenytoin that's done this? And he was like, yes. And I was like, really? Because the scientific evidence in phenytoin is it's a very toxic drug to your body. There is no way, even if phenytoin was responsible for stopping Cole's seizures, that he would have repaired so quickly because of phenytoin, because it knocks your body completely. You know, it can cause liver disease, heart disease, gum disease. It really is bad for your body. So there's no way he would have repaired and healed. We had a 1.5 years worth of physio plans that they had planned for home that we were signed off within a couple of weeks. The physio said, he's the best I've ever seen him. Like, there's no point in me being here. And her husband has epilepsy, and she was like, this is just incredible. I've never seen anything like it. So when we went back to see the consultant to say, look how amazing he is, for him not to even ask any questions or be interested it was devastating to me, because I left so deflated thinking they're going to be like, wow, this is incredible, tell me more. Yeah. But they never, no interest, none.
It's extremely frustrating to even hear this. I mean, I have no idea what you must feel like at the time, because you go in there and what it should be, essentially, I was expecting you to say that he was going to be delighted to see this wee guy, and he's like, look how great you're doing amazing, it must be this medicine. But instead, he falls back on his own ideological preference of pharmaceuticals are responsible, because it's like that's all they've been taught. Yeah. From the outside, it actually kind of seems like that cannabis as a medicine, cannabis as a substance for improvement, is like an alien invader to their knowledge, because it's like we don't know where this fits in, so we won't even address it, and we'll move towards the symptoms and the response that we're familiar with.
He's just, so far in this journey, even Cole's GPs asked to prescribe it. Cole's own GP phoned me up out of the blue and said, I've seen you on the news, what's going on, tell me more, come in and see me. I sat and spoke to him, and he said, look, at the guidelines, it just, the new guidelines for NICE were released on the 11th of November 2019, which was my oldest son's birthday. And he said, Lisa, I think there's a bit that I could help through the shared care option.
Yeah.
And the shared care, as you know, if you go to a consultant in the hospital for, say, your back, and they prescribe you really strong painkillers, you don't continue to go back to the consultant for your painkillers. You take that prescription and you get it from your GP surgery, and they honour the prescription. And what happens is the consultant will oversee any changes, but your GP will prescribe what the consultant says. So through that arrangement, he said, I would be willing to do that if the consultant that gives Cole's prescription says that's okay. So I contacted Cole's private consultant, said, the GP is willing to prescribe this through the NHS. This is incredible. She was like delighted. She went, yep, I'll oversee any changes in Cole's Bedrolite. So if it needs to be increased or whatever, I'll still take to do with that. And then he'll do the prescriptions through the shared care agreement. She wrote a letter to him. He agreed, took it to the health board, and they said no. It would have to be an NHS consultant that was writing the original prescription in order for them to do a shared care agreement. And I said, it's really unfair, because here I've had Cole's own consultant who's asked to prescribe, and Cole's consultant, good, bad, or indifferent, he wouldn't have asked to prescribe Bedrolite for Cole if he didn't believe that it was helping him. Yeah. He would have just said a carte blanche no, but he didn't. He asked, and then came back and said to me, I'm not allowed because of the guidelines. So his NHS consultant isn't allowed because of guidelines. So his GP and private consultant said, right, okay, well, we'll do it as a team then. And they've said, no, well, actually, you're not allowed to, because you don't fit under the NHS criteria, because you're a private consultant. It was just, every opportunity that I had, every wall that I felt like I was breaking down, there was another one popping up right in front of it. And they just keep saying, no, they're not NHS consultant, so they can't.
So this is what I mean. It's just endless boundaries, no matter where you turn.
Yeah.
It's just continuous boundaries over and over and over. So at this moment in time, it's brilliant that Cole's doing so well. I mean, what do you have planned for the near future? Just continuous perseverance?
Yeah, just keep fighting, keep getting the story out there, and hope one day that somebody grows a backbone and actually does what's right for the kids instead of ticking boxes. Yeah. I just don't understand how, for me, I think anyone would want to be that person that changed things.
Yeah.
And there's so many people that are in power right now that could be that person that signs that document that changes everything for all these parents and makes everything so much better. Yeah. And I don't understand why they don't want to stick their head up and go, do you know what, let's give the kids what they need. There might not be evidence in a way that they want in their clinical trials, but if you take every case individually, and there's over 30 now that are on private prescriptions, and said, right, this is what they started off on, this is how many seizures they were having, nothing else has changed except this cannabis oil that's been added in, and this is the outcome. Surely if you look at 30 different children, 30 different families from all different backgrounds, from all different areas of the UK, and say, well, they're not all conspiring with each other. Nobody funds us, we fund ourselves.
Yeah.
Why would we lie? That's what I keep saying. If I was, why would I do all this if it wasn't to get Cole what he actually needs to keep him safe and keep him healthy? Because I don't get paid. I'm not a business.
Yeah.
I'm a single parent, 2 kids. I work. I have a million things that I should be doing, and I spend all my days off and all my time writing to politicians, writing to newspapers, taking interviews over the phone. I am meeting with people from the NHS, from the government. There's just, every day I've got something that I'm trying to push forward, and you just keep getting hit with the same rubbish if they even bother to respond. The last letter I wrote was, again, looking for more funding, to see if there was any other options available. I've kind of wrote to them and said, right, okay, I've asked you for what I believe is available, so you're telling me that's not available, that we don't fit into that criteria, so can you tell me if there is anything available to Cole that he does fit the criteria, considering Cole's now probably, I think, one of the longest seizure free, had the most amazing results, and yet nobody's even interested in looking at him. And that's what I keep saying, if this had happened, like my cousin, when I did fundraising way back, when my oldest was only months old, to send her to America, my cousin had the same. She fought against the NHS, and they were saying, don't take her there, don't do that, you could kill her, all this stuff. And it was to release, so she could walk flat-footed for the first time. And she came back, and it was like a miracle. The surgery had worked and she's now able to walk unaided. She'll always have cerebral palsy, but there's just so much aspects of her life that have improved because of this surgery. And the consultant that argued with my cousin when she's seen her said, I want to know more, and actually flew over to America to train for the surgery. And now the surgery is available in the UK. And she had letters from them saying, we do not agree with this, we do not give you our support, you could lose the NHS support when you come back if you choose to do this, blah, blah, blah. And yet they went full circle with her. So I expected the same.
Yeah.
I thought, once I've proved it, they'll know. They know what I'm like as a mum. They know I don't make silly decisions. I'm not a silly person. I'm not ruthless when it comes to my children. I'm very careful. Once Cole's better and I prove it, they'll jump on board and they'll be like, right. And the very fact that, you know, they haven't is where the conspiracy in my head comes, because it's like, well, it can't just be about money.
Yeah.
What is this to do with? What's going on here? Like, there has to be something else going on in the background, because if I the type of person that I am, if someone told me this story, I would be like, that's a lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
I'd be thinking there has to be more to it. Somebody's must have said there must be more to it. That girl's talking nonsense, because that wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, and we are living with it every day. And I mean, I can only speak for me and Cole, but I'm not the only parent that struggles with this. And obviously I know that there's parents that have actually had to move abroad. We can't do that because my boy's dad and I have separated. So I can't just up roots and move away with my boys. It doesn't work like that. And you've got school. And I don't want to leave the support here in Scotland. You know, I like my home. But I can't fundraise forever. And £1,400 a month is I just can't afford that. I can't afford to pay it. So I have to just keep fighting and hope that one day somebody stands up for us and helps.
Well, hopefully that day will be sooner rather than later, Lisa. But I think we've covered everything.
Yeah.
You got anything you'd like to add before we get going?
No.
Thanks to Lisa for giving me her time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoy the content. I'll see you next time.